After my recent Ben 10 vs Goku discussion, it got me thinking about pairing Ben 10 against other shonen protagonists, and who better than a personal favourite of mine and the main character from the highest selling manga with Monkey D. Luffy. Before we get into this proper, like I've said in my previous video, I'm a huge fan of Ben 10 and I've been watching this series since it first aired in 2005, though that should be pretty evident enough by this channel. And coincidentally, I've also been a fan of One Piece since 2005 when it first aired the 4Kids version on Toaster TV. For those of you outside of Australia, that's most Australians' introduction to all things anime. And from there I started reading the manga and never stopped. And while I'm not a power scaler by any means, and I don't really delve too deep into feats and crunching the numbers, I'm an enormous fan of both of these series and think 20 years of enjoyment should give me somewhat of a place to come at this from. And if that's not enough, stick around. I've brought someone more qualified on board for this one who will appear later in the video. Going into this, we'll be using a prime version of Ben from the end of Omniverse, only with a caveat of no Alien X, purely for the purpose of keeping this interesting and fair. And the version of Luffy we see post-Wano at the start of Egghead, just so we're in a place where both manga readers and anime watchers both have an understanding of where Luffy is at in his journey. So if you're not caught up, I'll be bringing up some pretty major spoilers, particularly for One Piece at this point. I'll quickly cover what each of these characters can do. I'm sure most of you watching this are reasonably familiar with Ben 10, but pretty simply he has the Omnitrix, an alien device that allows him to transform into an enormous range of alien transformations, each with their own strengths and weaknesses. We'll discuss those transformations a bit more in depth as we get further into this. While Luffy, for those of you who aren't familiar, his abilities boil down to two factors. The first being that he's a devil fruit user, originally thought to be the Gomu Gomu no Mi, but in the current story we know it's actually the Hito Hito no Mi model Nika, being a mythical zone with the powers of the sun god Nika. We'll touch on that more later, but for now he has the ability to stretch, deflect any blunt force damage like from punches or bullets, and possibly most relevant to this encounter, is immune to electrical attacks but is vulnerable to being submerged in water. And the other source of Luffy's powers come from a One Piece power system called Haki. This comes down to Conqueror's Haki that allows you to assert your willpower against other opponents, Armament Haki that lets you coat your skin, make it more durable and able to affect other Devil Fruit users who could otherwise just not be damaged, and Observation Haki, which has a bunch of other applications but basically comes down to being especially observant and in Luffy's case being able to see slightly into the future. This is an absolutely condensed butchering of these abilities, but that's the gist of things. There's also Luffy's Gears, which goes as follows. Gear 2 that increases his speed and strength by pumping his blood faster. Gear 3 where Luffy blows air into his bones, inflating body parts for larger, more powerful attacks. Gear 4, and really ramping up here, there's a few versions of this form, but he coats parts of his body with Armament Haki, this giving him a major power boost, and for the sake of keeping this video streamlined, we'll be covering the Bound Man form of Gear 4. I don't really see which version of Gear 4 we choose as all too relevant. And with Gear 5, we'll touch on that once we're properly into things. As far as how this fight actually plays out, I'm going into this as fairly as possible. American football field rules. They're in a neutral, flat playing ground. There's no outside help or equipment outside of what they'd normally have on them. They'd act as they usually would, seeing each other as opponents, but wouldn't act any differently than they would in any other given combat situation. Simply put, they're behaving as they would in line with their character. Ben would work out pretty quickly that blunt force attacks aren't going to be all that effective, though I'm sure this will be a process of elimination, cycling through physically tough aliens over time. If at random Ben were to try using Water Hazard, that's another story, and things will go pretty sideways for Luffy quite quickly. Water Hazard being able to shoot and control water, Luffy's only major weakness. Not that Ben would be aware of that at first. And given that all of his more physical aliens aren't doing much to Luffy, seeing as his body is impervious to non-Haki hits, Ben would be cycling through aliens who can attack in other ways, which picking Water Hazard amongst these forms seems pretty likely. Particularly once Ben works out that his electrical aliens won't affect Luffy at all. Their electricity won't work on Luffy in the slightest, which limits us quite a bit here. So removing any aliens that use purely physical force or have electrical abilities limits us pretty majorly. Forearms, Humongousaur, Wrath, even Waybig's physical attacks won't affect Luffy beyond physically moving him around. It's not a strength limit, it's simply that he's rubber. And while that takes a good chunk of alien transformations out of the equation, you've still got some pretty standard aliens I can really see hurting Luffy. As the fight continues on and Ben starts actually affecting Luffy, I'm seeing Luffy work his way through his gears pretty quickly. Most of this fight would involve Ben cycling through aliens against a Gear 4 Luffy. As far as Ben's viable transformations go, NRG, Atomics, Waybig, Jet Ray, or even Heat Blast all come to mind. There's a lot more than that, but those are the first ones that popped in my head. Otherwise, Ghost Freak or Pesky Dust would probably be pretty effective. Big Chill as well, but I'm not thinking Ice holds Luffy back for too long. And like I said with Pesky Dust, that's a pretty quick win for Ben, though I wonder if Luffy's willpower would somehow snap him out of the trance. The scenario I'm seeing here would have Ben transforming into Gravitak, pinning Luffy down, and inevitably you'd hear the drums of liberation. with Luffy getting right back up in Gear 5. In this form, Luffy is awakened and not only stronger, but he can now manipulate and transform both himself and the environment, kind of functioning like a Looney Tunes-esque Toon Force, and he can somewhat do anything he sees fit. What makes it difficult is just trying to limit what Luffy can do here. I want to make an argument for clockwork, reverting time or erasing Luffy from history, but I can see Luffy grabbing and bending that time ray back at him, or Luffy jumping on top of clockwork, twisting his headpiece, sending them both backwards or forwards in time. Though this isn't to say that Luffy can't be hit by attacks and can't be hurt. And Luffy's stamina in this form tends to run out pretty quickly. I'm thinking Ben as way big could feasibly throw Gear 5 Luffy into space, but what's to stop him from boomeranging back to Earth? I'm thinking in a one-on-one, eventually Luffy gets tired out and reverts to his base form, and really pick an alien within reason from there and they beat Luffy. If you're dissatisfied with that, I brought on friend of the channel and resident anime enjoyer, tylearned, to give his take on this topic.
Just wanted to say thanks to Wardy for allowing me to go ahead and discuss some of my 2 favorite verses in all of fiction. As you guys may know from my channel, I have scaled Luffy and Ben 10 countless times, but to make it simple for you guys so you guys aren't going to listen to a snooze fest, Luffy's greatest feat was him being able to pretty much make a punch the size of Onigashima and shift the island itself. Based on not only the size of the Onigashima punch, but also the kinetic energy behind the attack, Luffy's attack potency should come out to around multi-continental to potentially even small planetary. For reference, Ben's mid-tier aliens, or pretty much any of the top-tier aliens that are ultimate level or above, should single-handedly be able to take care of Luffy pretty easily. The reason for this is because Ultimate Aggregor would pretty much be unfazed from a nuclear fusion bomb that can cover over 2.5 light years. This would mean a grenade that can cover the range of a solar system would do no damage to Aggregor. And yet we've seen even base Humongosaur visibly do damage to Aggregor. And of course, Ultimate Humongosaur, Ultimate Echo, and any of the aliens that Ben uses on Kevin 11 should be applicable here because Kevin 11 absorbed Aggregor's power on top of his own. Which, by the way, on his own, he was already more than enough to handle Ultimate Aggregor with no difficulty. I think it's pretty obvious to say that most of the Ben 10 aliens are able to dispose of Gear 5 Luffy, and, you know, I don't think Gear 5 Luffy's invincible and he's omnipotent. And if you do think that, well then Alien X. But if you guys wanted me to get a little bit more specific with the aliens that can bypass the rubber properties of Luffy's fruit, any alien that can use cutting or slash attacks should be able to at least bypass Luffy's durability. And even despite Luffy's seemingly invincible devil fruit, he's still susceptible to radiation, possession, and a lot of other hacks that Ben can easily exploit. It's safe to say the future king of the pirates gets folded by a 10-year-old, which is honestly kind of funny in hindsight.
Though the real ending here, and the one I had decided on well before I started writing this video, this ends with the two of them sharing a meal together. There is no world where this isn't the outcome. After so many arcs or major moments in the story of One Piece, they've celebrated with a feast. And Luffy as a character has such an infectious charm to him. I'm seeing both Ben and Luffy enjoying a meal together, probably at Mr. Smoothies, with Luffy clearing out the place, eating them out of house and home. And a major thanks to tylearned for appearing in this video, his channel's linked in the description. If you have any thoughts or feelings on how this fight would play out differently, let me know. Otherwise, thanks for watching.